So Jeffrey, welcome to the show. You're one of the guests that's been on my like must gets for years now. So it's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you. You could have reached out to me earlier. I'm pretty.
You know what? I was shocked by I think from a fan and an audience perspective, how approachable everybody is in a way when you
Yeah,
just get like yeah, cool, I'm down, I'm free X time, and I'm like, oh, okay. It's like that's
yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, again, if it weren't for the fans, like, you know, there would be no Final Destination 2, 3, 4, or any of the other films I've done. So, I always love talking to horror podcasts and stuff.
If we could go back to the start for a second,
Mhm.
when did you first become introduced to the dark, the scary, um, horror? Maybe it isn't even a horror movie. Maybe it's a TV show. Maybe it's a cartoon or something you saw as a kid that scared you.
The first thing that I saw, I still remember it vividly, was the Salem's Lot miniseries, and my mom wouldn't let me watch it, but she watched it, so I snuck out and watched part of it, and I saw the scene where Danny Glick comes up to the window and is scratching on it, and that scene scared me so bad that I had to sleep in my mom's. I had to sneak in my mom's room and sleep by her bed, and my sister and mom shared a big bed, and so my sister knew that I was doing that, so she'd bring shit to bed and like throw it at me during the nights because she knew I couldn't say anything because mom would whip me for watching the movie. So yeah, that was the first. Yeah, that's still burned into my mind. I still remember sneaking down the hall and watching it, and I got so scared that I had to go back to my room.
Did that would you say that piqued your fascination, or did you kind of push back and kind
No,
of get away?
it peaked it. I became a huge Stephen King fan after that, and started reading his books. And also was very into Greek and Roman mythology, which was very violent as well. So yeah, I think that that Salem's Lot piqued my interest, and then um, probably in when I was about 12 or 13, I met some really small, like two really good friends who were into horror, and they would let us watch rated R horror films. And my mom didn't like it much, but she's like, at least I know that you're at each other's houses and you're not getting into trouble. So that was her like rationale for letting us watch it. So we would just look for the bloodiest, goriest movies we could find. Um, until I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, which changed my life. Up until then, it was just blood and gore. Um, yeah, that's all we cared about.
What was that experience like, seeing something like A Nightmare on Elm Street? Because, obviously from my point of view, I'm in my mid 30s. So, when I had seen that, I think I had seen probably, kind of dumb, funny Freddy before I had seen like the scary Freddy. So
Yeah,
then when I went back to see the scary Freddy, I don't know if it had the same effect.
yeah. No, it was terrifying because it was a double feature of Alone in the Dark and Nightmare on Elm Street, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I read later that the print had got washed out before the film came out. So when I saw the preview on TV, it looked a little cheap, and so I was kind of like, I'm not. That doesn't look very good. Um, and I grew up in Kentucky, and we were too poor to go to the movies a lot. So me and my friend sat on his dad's truck because he lived behind the drive-in, and we turned the CB station to the channel where you could listen to the sound. And so I'm watching Alone in the Dark, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. And then Freddie came on, and it blew my mind. Just he was terrifying. I hadn't really, the psycho trope hadn't hit me yet, so I thought Tina was going to live, and then she got killed, and then you know I still think to this day, well, not to this day, it's changed somewhat, but I think up until that point, Nancy Thompson was probably the strongest final girl that I'd ever seen. Because up until then, as much as I love the actresses, most of them kind of ran around and screamed and were the last one standing. And this was the first time I saw like a really proactive final girl, like studying Freddie, going after him in the dream world, pulling, like it was just, and then Robert Englund was great. There was just, and every set piece is like a mate. Like it's just, yeah, it blew my mind. Like I literally, I went home and I wrote a prequel idea. I'm like 14 years old in Kentucky, and I mailed it to Bob Shea, who ran New Line Cinema at the time. And he sent it back because it was unsolicited. And then I sent it back because I'm like, look, buddy, I spent like $3 on your movie, so I think you can read my story. And he got back to me. And, yeah, this was right before New Line. I think it was just the perfect convergence because this was right before New Line blew up. And I stayed pen pals with him and his assistant, Joey Mann, um, from age 14 to 19. And they would read scripts and they would send me posters. And I ended up working at New Line when I moved to New York, and they made Final Destination. So that movie not only changed my perception of horror films and what they could be, because I'm very big into like fantasy horror. Um, but it also was so crucial to like my career. So it's hard to separate the two.
What was that like to come full circle there with, sending a script like that from just a really harmless place as a teenage kid to then, I suppose, sitting in those offices and something that you've helped create is being made by that same company?
I mean, it was, I mean, it was surreal, but when you're young, you have this kind of I wasn't like this crafty, like, like I always knew I was going to work in the film industry, like from a young age. Like that was just never like I had no plan B. I majored in theater, and I told my mom I was studying science until I got into plays, and then I had to invite her. So getting to work at New Line was cool enough, and I got to see like, I read so many great scripts and met so many wonderful people there. I was there 11 years, and it's funny because I sold the treatment for Final Destination in 97 and wrote the original first draft of that. And the movie came out in 2000, which was, the shooting script was written by James Wong and Glenn Morgan. They did a great job in adding a lot of great stuff, because my original take was very Nightmare on Elm Street, where death played with their survivor's guilt to make them kill themselves, which was a little dark. And, James and Glenn, when they wrote the shooting script, they added the Rube Goldberg aspect, which I thought was brilliant because it definitely made it more palpable to people who aren't horror fans. But yeah, I was there, still working as we were getting in the reviews and as we saw it become a sleeper hit. And then I wrote a treatment for the sequel that New Line bought. And then finally they were like, we love you, Jeffrey, but you're like a professional writer now. So yeah, you need to go out and write. So you need to leave the nest. Cause I was just like, oh, I'll just stay here and work and keep like, I don't know what I was thinking. I'm a very creature of habit. So I just felt so lucky to be at the house that Freddie built and also be a part of the New Line legacy that I probably would have just stayed there, So
What do you think that is about you then that I suppose made you like that at that point? You said you always knew you would work in the movies, and having that, that, I guess, desire, that knowledge, that confidence to know like there is nothing else, this is what I want to do. But then also, being quote unquote, like obviously when something like that happens, you become a professional writer and people have to kind of go like, now it's time to leave this job and like this is what you're going to
yeah.
do now.
Yeah, no, I think I do think that's, certain people have a calling in life, and all, I acting was my first love actually. But when I moved to New York in the early 90s, diversity, it was just not on anybody's radar. Like I got an agent really quickly, but she's like, look, you're like an ethnic Michael J. Fox, like an ethnic boy next door. And I'm like, well, that's great. Everybody loves Michael J. Fox. And she's like, yeah, but they don't write roles for people like that. Like, you know, you're dark skinned, and she wasn't being mean. She was being real. She's like, if you could rap or if you could, play basketball or could break dance and stuff, like, maybe there's some work out there, but it's just really hard. So instead of giving up, I just said, well, writing is my second favorite thing besides acting. So I'm just gonna write. Um, so that was just always my calling. I think, we always have them, but the world, no, we don't always have them. Sometimes we don't know what we want to do till like much later in life. But especially when you want to be like an artist, they certainly try to beat that out of you at a young age. They're like, oh, you'll never make a living at that. You're gonna, you know, the odds of you ever working is astronomical. So you need to get a real job and you need to have a backup plan. And I just never had a backup plan. Um,
I was going to ask, how did you deal with that in life? It's something I'm always fascinated by with people who get into the arts or something creative, and especially something I think in film, especially, it can be quite volatile because a lot of people don't realize that you might spend several years of your life with a project that all of a sudden gets picked up. It seems like everything's going great, and then it sits on a shelf
oh yeah.
and nothing happens. But how did you deal with, I guess, that pushback from maybe, I don't know, maybe friends, maybe family? And I think a lot of times people don't even realize they're maybe doing it from a good place, but that thing of being like, Jeffrey, when maybe it's time to get like a real job, maybe like let's not do this anymore.
Yeah, well, luckily, I started working at New Line when I was 19, so I didn't. Um, so my mom was like, "Oh, okay," um, but working at a studio and seeing how the movies were made helped me a lot in knowing that it wasn't really always, and oftentimes wasn't about the quality of the work. It was like so many other factors that you have no say in. So for instance, like we would get like a really great script in with no director attached, and then we'd get a very mediocre script in with a big director attached and a star. So they would make the mediocre script over the great script. Um, I will say that New Line, especially in its heyday when I was there, which was, I think its heyday, was very creator friendly and very risk. They would take risks, like that. They made Blade when people were like, "Who wants to see a black vampire, hunter?" And they made Blade, and then they would make like The Mask, which studios were like, "Who's going to see a movie with this crazy guy wearing a green mask and doing crazy stuff? And who's going to make Dumb and Dumber? And who's going to make House Party? And who's going to make Friday?" So New Line, back then, was run by creatives. So it was a very nurturing environment, but you still saw the business side of it, which is really out of your control. So that helped me kind of set a baseline for myself where I don't get crushed, because I did read a quote. I forget who said it, but they said you have to be willing to dedicate 10 years of your life if you want to be an artist before you make it. And when they say make it, they don't mean like all of a sudden you're like, have a big blockbuster movie coming out. They're talking about anything happening. And I think the reason that resonated with me is because you do have to be willing to commit like that long, like that passion has to be that strong where you're like, okay, I'll take shitty waiter jobs and but I'm going to stick with it. And it was actually 10 years till the day I graduated high school that I sold Final Destination. So, and I'd had starts and stops before that. So I was like, screw this 10-year thing. Cause I was getting some background work and stuff in movies. And I was like, I got an agent release. I'm like, this is going to be a breeze. And then reality hits and I'm like, oh, there is something to that 10-year rule. Cause I see a lot of people who, and obviously the landscape has changed so much since I was at New Line, but you see so many people who just come in and they're like, I'm coming to LA, and if I don't make it in 2 years, I'm going home. And I'm like, well, you might as well go home. Like if because there's so many people trying to break into the business. There are people that have connections that if you don't have connections, that's something you have to work on. Um, and there's a lot of pretty but not talented people that are coming out trying to make it. And so you have to, as my old boss said, you have to cut through the clutter. So that means you have to kind of like outlast all these people who are kind of coming in like for a year and a half to give it a shot, you know?
Yeah. And I always love to ask these questions because I feel like they're very important for, a lot of people to hear the realities, I guess, of how it all works. do you find being in LA, that is that still a thing? Like I remember years ago hearing, of all the people that would arrive to LA weekly, just so green, had no idea, thought like, oh, within a few weeks I'll be made. Does
Yeah.
that still kind of happen, or have, like people like yourself kind of gotten the realities of the message out there enough that people go, okay, I can't just, arrive on a plane and hope to be on the red carpet tomorrow?
Yeah. No, and the thing is, LA, the whole industry has shifted now. So there's so many markets that are, Texas, Atlanta, Louisiana. Like there's so many. I mean, if you're interested in being a filmmaker or an actor or whatever, I suggest you look at your state's like film commission if they have one and see what stuff is going on in your own state, because there have been productions have moved away from LA because it's really become, unless you're like super rich, it's become cost prohibitive to make movies out here. Even with tax, even if they bring up the tax credits, um, people are so used to shooting in LA that you have to go through all these permits. You have to pay so much to shoot at a location. Whereas if you shoot in your hometown or you shoot in your home state, there people are very excited and very incentivized to help out. So I don't think you have to come to LA. Actually, I would say just because it's so expensive, really the cost of living out here is so expensive. Um, I always tell people I think it's better to find your tribe like locally. Like I was talking with Craig Perry, who's the producer of all the films, and like the godfather of the Final Destination franchise. I adore the man. And we were speaking at a class here at UCLA, and it was all filmmakers. And he was talking, and he's like, "How many of you all are writers?" And a whole bunch of people raise their hand. "How many of you all are directors?" They raise their hand. He goes, "How many of you writers and directors talk to each other?" And none of them did, because all the writers were hanging out with writers and the directors were hanging out with directors. And he goes, "That's the problem. Like writers, you need directors. Directors, you need writers. You guys should be talking to each other." And that's what I tell filmmakers. It's like, I mean, don't just go out and hook up with any Tom, Dick, or Harry that comes along. You got to do your due diligence. But, if you find like actors that you really like, or you find a director you really like, and, you find a team that you really like, start making your own. I know it's hard and people hate when I say this, but, start making your own stuff, start building your resume, start learning, because you're always learning. It doesn't matter if you move out to Hollywood and sell a script. You're always learning and growing. So I always say, like, you definitely don't have to come to LA to start doing what you want to do. Like there might be a point where you move out to LA, but you don't have to come out here to make it.
I've heard that so much more and more now, which I guess will be quite a nice thing for, a lot of European, UK filmmakers and things like that. I think from this side of the world for a long time, it felt like, if you're not in Hollywood, if you're not in LA, you're not in the community, I guess. How important would you say is it for you nowadays with your work, that sense of networking and, maybe chatting with up and coming writers, or somebody has an idea or a new director, or this guy wants you to hear about his project? Would you say that's an important part of your day-to-day career now?
I'm trying. Well, to be honest, like what I'm working on right now is trying to, because I've had a very steady career, but people kind of have this weird idea of what having a successful career is like in Hollywood. You don't understand, like, if you get paid like $100,000 for a script, 25% of that goes out to your agent, manager, and lawyer. Then you've got taxes on top of that. So, and now with streaming, the residual market is really almost dried up now. So what I'm working on now is, I decided this year, because I've spent a lot of time, and I love doing it. I've spent a lot of time like helping friends and indie filmmakers, especially from my home state of Kentucky, like trying to get their movies off the ground. And my agents were like, "Dude, you got to focus on you, and getting like I want to start a production company. My goal in the next year and a half is to start a production company where I'll be in a better position to help people, because right now it's like I'm really not allowed to read scripts, just because of legality stuff. Like everything has to come through an agent to my agent. Um, and I do get I do get a lot of Twitter messages and Instagram messages with people who are like, I have a great concept. Will you read it and maybe help me write it? And it's like, I can't do that. Just again, for copyright and legal protections for me and the writers, but also, you know, I do this for a living. So if I'm going to write something, I need to get paid for it.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
But I do what I can as far as like, I did a film, like a screenwriting online course. I'm blanking on the name of it right now. It's easy to find if you Google it, but it's free on YouTube. So I always try to like, you know, do as many podcasts, speak at as many places and as I can to like give advice, and really about how the industry is changing. Because it's right now we're in a really tough place because we had COVID, then we had the strikes, um, and then the fires, and people just aren't paying what they like. When I say New Line was the golden age, like back then, people would shell out like $1 million for a script, and now it's like you can make a $5 million movie, and good luck getting a distributor unless you've got like a big star in it. It's it's just turned around. So it's that's why I think in indie films, and that's why I love horror. I think horror has the best options to find audiences. And like I think the Terrifier model is a great example. Like, God love Damien for all the work he's put into that, because he turned it into, from like a smaller character in an anthology to building this whole, franchise around him. And it took him a long time. Like people, we're all excited for how well the last one did, but has been working at this for a long time. So he's put in the hard blood, sweat, and tears to make that happen. And, so yeah, I don't know. You don't have to be here. I try to mentor more through advice, because I meet a lot of, because I write at Starbucks. So I meet a lot of writers there, and a lot of my friends are actors and writers. So I'm trying to help them, but also focus on myself. So, I definitely am open, but I also realize, especially at this point, especially with the 25th anniversary of Final Destination coming up, I've got like 5 projects that I'm like trying to really get off the ground and going this year. We'll see if it happens. I'm staying optimistic.
Yeah, I was just going to say, how challenging is that now, trying to get a project off the ground? Because you mentioned a lot of the dynamic has changed now. It's not that same golden era. And I've heard, behind the scenes, I've been told some like insulting numbers that have been given or been put forward to people for projects or scripts or whatever. And I'm like shocked, thinking, okay, maybe it was, I didn't expect it to be like, golden age money, but I was like, wow, I didn't expect it to be like, to go from here to like,
oh yeah, it's gotten, there's always this thing where the people with the money don't want to spend it. So they will definitely try to squeeze every, free rewrite out of you that they can, and not pay you much money. Saying no is a very powerful thing, which, I tend to be a people pleaser. So I've had a hard time saying no, but then after, I've finally been like, no, like if you guys aren't going to pay me what I'm worth, and I don't, and I'm, trust me, it's not a lot. Trust me, I'm pretty cheap. But the numbers that come in sometimes are incredibly insulting. Like I've been working on this one project for 3 years now, and I'm not even going to tell you how much they paid me, but let's just say it was $10,000. And it's been a 3-year process, and I'm like, that's crazy, that it's because it's taking them so long to get stuff together. And So you expect a lot of people, people have the attitude, well, you should be lucky that you're working. So why should we pay you? You should be lucky you're working. Like that just seems to be an attitude that is very prevalent.
Do you find that, um, given, like you just said, given the landscape now, and maybe there's a lot of, you know, average to maybe good writers and things like that and creators out there that are maybe willing to do it for next to nothing, that it kind of starts to mess with the whole structure? Like, because I found that I had a career before I done this, and it felt like a similar thing where you would be like underpriced, I think, because the answer was always, well, this guy here will do it for half of what
Oh
you used to do it for. So then what's the problem?
yeah, and the thing is, like, I have friends who make a living writing Hallmark movies. They crank out like 5 or 6 a year, and they're doing fine. But with horror, like it's not like I try to write expensive horror films, but I've had so many of my horror films get set up at studios, and they go into turnaround, and then somebody buys them, and then they make them for like, you know, $500,000, and it's like, well, there goes another potential franchise down the drain. Not that you can't write a $500,000 film that can be a franchise, but most of the stuff that I write, at least has a decent budget, not like I mean, Final Destination, the first Final Destination in 2000 had a $22 million budget, and
Mm.
now if you have anything over 7 million, that's considered a big budget for horror films. And I'm like, you guys are crazy because you're making all this money. It's like,
Yeah, it is. It's a strange thing. And I suppose, in your professional opinion, why do you think it is then that, because I feel like horror has always been considered like the redheaded stepchild
yeah,
for nearly everything, for the awards, for,
yeah,
I even found over here in Europe for a long time, it was kind of, I could never be sure if I was going to see a new horror movie, because it was like, oh, I don't know which theaters are going to actually pick this up, and I might have to drive like 2 hours away to like
yeah.
go see this movie in some obscure theater. Um, but even as regards, I guess, the studios, it's very strange to me, and it's kind of lost on me how, um they don't want to spend any money to make them, but then they make back like this thing of, 10 million or less, or 5 million or less, and then the movie makes, 100 million back. And I'm
Yeah.
like, so at what point though has nobody looked at that and went, well, maybe if we actually gave the money that suggested this might actually, is it because things like, not to take anything away from Terrifier or Damien or any of those guys, but is it because they see something like that and they go, oh, well, that made, 85 million and we only spent X
Well,
amount?
I think the biggest problem, honestly, with Hollywood is that business people have taken over the studios. Like when I was growing up, like like again, Bob Shea was the ultimate film lover, and Mike DeLuca, who was one of the best executives I think in this business, was a film lover, and they took risks. And now you have, and I saw it happening as New Line got bought by Ted Turner, and then got bought by Warner Brothers. Like they started bringing business people in. Um, into a creative business. So they are always looking now, especially because a lot of the studios are publicly traded now. So they're looking at, we have to make our shareholders money. So they want to protect their investment. So that's why you see so many remakes and sequels and prequels and spin-offs. Because in their brain, it's like, well, there's already a built-in audience for this, but then they'll spend like $200 or $300 million, to get the biggest stars in a not great movie, and then when it doesn't do well, they're like, well, we had the biggest stars in it, because they're thinking business, not creatively. So I think that that's been the biggest kind of seismic change in the overall business, is that we don't have a lot. I'm not saying that none of the studios have creative people running them, but I'm just saying a lot of the studios that used to be run by purely creatively driven people with vision are now, they're afraid of taking risks, because if they don't make money for their shareholders, they'll get sued. So, the kind of business part of show business has taken over this show entertainment part of it. So I think that that's the biggest change that I've seen. That's kind of been very hurtful to creators of original material.
Is there a way for us, and I mean that as in the audience, the fans, and I guess coming together with you guys to change that? Or is it a case of we kind of have to maybe potentially like build our own model now where we kind of can exist outside of that bubble, I guess, and then maybe if Hollywood see something and go, like Terrifier, for example, oh well, I heard Damien say a couple of times that they wanted to take the property and they wanted to like reboot it and remake it and reimagine it and do all this stuff, and he kind of held out and said, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
This is my story. This is the way I want to tell it. So if you want to get in on it, this is the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
Do you think that like there's a way, I guess, for horror as a community to come together and kind of, I don't know, make Hollywood come calling?
I think absolutely. I think that it's twofold. I think supporting original horror films is really important. Like, Companion was very entertaining, but it didn't do what it should have done. Hard Eyes is the exception, because most horror movies open and then they drop 50%. But the word of mouth on that was so great that it actually did better. So that one's going to be a word of mouth hit. And Final Destination was a word of mouth hit too. Like, it opened at number 3, I think, when it came out. And then we saw the tracking during the week, and it was actually doing better every day as opposed to dropping every day. So supporting independent film and talking about it and encouraging your friends to go out and see it in theaters will definitely help. But I also think at the same time, you have to look at ways to kind of create your own unique films where you don't have to compromise your creativity. Because if you sell something to a studio, they own it. And so you either roll with what they tell you, or they'll bring in another writer, to rewrite your script. So you learn to pick your battles and things like that. But I think with technology now, especially with, you can shoot like a high definition movie on an iPhone and get lenses for it. Like, there are ways to make really cool movies that will find an audience. So I just encourage people to do that, because the thing is, you don't want to let the business side of stuff like kill your creativity, especially when you're starting out. Because when you're younger, you're kind of fearless and you're like invincible and you're like, I can do this. And the longer you kind of get it, once you get into the business side of it, that business side can start beating you down like creatively, because then you start thinking, well, I've got to write this, but it's got to appeal to these people, and it's got to appeal to this audience, and it just, yeah, you have to like consciously kind of keep that out of your brain, and make something that's pure to you. Because I always tell people, like, your voice, like, everybody has a different life experience, and if you're filtering like your perspective through your work, that's going to make it different than everything else out there. Like, don't try to copy other stuff. Like, that's the worst thing you can do, because by the time a movie comes out and it's a hit, that thing has been in development probably for 10 years. And so while that movie's been in development and they're plotting it, like, word gets around to other studios, and then they start looking for similar stuff. So by the time, a demonic possession movie comes out, you'll see 4 of them come out at the same time. And everybody's like, oh, I'm going to write a demonic possession movie. But by the time you write that,
Yeah.
some other subgenre of film is making its way through the system and will come out, and then demonic movies are going to be like, oh, we've had too many of those. So I always just say, write what you're really passionate about, and that's your creative voice, and just finding a community to make it. And again, I know it's hard. It's hard with, the money part is hard, but
After all this time, I guess, in the business, and it, it still sounds like the creativity, the passion, the desire has never really disappeared for you. But on I guess, a more businessy aspect, what would you say the toughest lesson that you've learned is?
um I think the toughest lesson I've learned is um even the people maybe with good intentions, um, you just it's hard to find people that you can trust, to stay true to their word, to present themselves accurately. As far as like I tell people, like I am very honest. Like I've been like, even my best friends who are actors, I'm like, I might be able to send your reel to the casting director, but that's all I can do. Like I can't get you an audition. I can't promise anything. Like that's like I never make promises to anybody. And this town is full of people. It's just like the world, in any other business where people like promise and if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Um, so I've gotten screwed over a lot by people that I trusted. So it's more about now trusting my instincts. Because I always joke that once a movie goes into production, there are a lot of people that would throw their mother under a bus to be a part of it. Like I've literally had people come out of the woodworks that I have not talked to in 20 years. And they're like, well, that sounds a lot like what we talked about one time over lunch. And I'm like,
Oh wow.
yeah, just shit like that. It's like, come on, dude. Um, so I think that's probably the toughest lesson is you've got to be, Hollywood, and it's no different than life because, people like to rag on Hollywood, but it's no different than life. There's professions that are just very transactional. Um, and, I've certainly had burnout points where I'm just like, I can't write anything more. I've got like a stack of scripts. Like, how many more do I have to fucking write? Um, but then what usually reignites my passion is either meeting fans at conventions and hearing how my work has like touched them or inspired them. um, and then also I'll meet, I've been very fortunate in the last couple months to meet a couple of producers who are just super passionate about film, and we've connected, and that's kind of got me re-inspired again. So it's kind of you've got to watch your creative circles because you know I think every creative person is a little like crazy, in the best possible way. Um, but there are definitely people that are just like, black holes that will try to like bring you down or just always so negative about, uh, you know, we're never going to make it. This town sucks and this business sucks. And it's like, you got to kind of keep those people out of your life because they will end up kind of bringing you down as well.
I was actually told that recently by somebody as well, having to like make those, whether it's something that somebody does on purpose or they don't realize they've gotten into that habit of that constant negativity and having to like try and distance yourself from that. And also, actually, there's been several Irish, probably more Irish and some UK, that have told me about, they make a movie, it comes out, it wins some awards, it gets played at a couple of festivals in the States and different places. And, next thing they know, they're on the famous water bottle tour. And
Oh,
it's like the thing of like kind of what you just said, everybody's over promising, everybody's like telling you you're so great, you're so amazing, we're going to do this with you, we're going to do that, we're going to, and like the amount of guys that said like, they came back home here and then realized, oh, everybody just filled me full of shit. That
yeah,
none of this is real.
yeah. And I think part of the problem too is there's a lot of people, they have a job title and so they have to like fill it. So I don't know how many pitch meetings I've been in where it's like, I know this person is just meeting every writer in town because that's their job. Like they're not really, I'm not getting a sense this person really is wanting to make a movie. It's just like, well, I gotta be able to show my boss I had a ton of pitch meetings. Um, and yeah, you do get a lot of over promising. I think the one thing that I've always admired about Europe though is they do take the arts very seriously, which I wish we did in this country because in this country it's sports and then arts is the first thing to go at any school. And it's such a creative outlet and it's such a I think it helps people like express their feelings and deal with their emotions and their issues. And it's just a shame, I think, that this country kind of treats it as like celebrity as opposed to artistry. And that's why I'm always amazed when I see actors that come out of Europe, because they really take the craft seriously. It's amazing. Like I want to move to Europe.
There's
So,
definitely been a big shift in I even seen, say, in the time I was coming up through school, it was still considered like I would have been considered like a little bit of a weirdo
yeah,
for not being overly interested in sports, being into movies, being into books and things like that. And now to see it, it's nearly become like the quote unquote cool thing
yeah.
to, you know, to want to go and do a film course or a music course or this or that. Like everybody seems to kind of, even the people who maybe weren't into it now are kind of leaning into it a bit and being like, "Hey, tell me a little bit more about that thing." Remember?
It's such a
It's
cultural thing too, because if you go back to ancient times, like art was like celebrated and so important. And I think part of the reason, if you just look at history, is art's always been kind of subversive in a way. So people would get away with like saying things in Shakespeare, that were critiquing the royalty at the time, and they didn't realize it. And so I think art can touch people in a way, like whether it's music or paintings, because it's open to so much interpretation. And I still have my songs from my childhood that like I connect with my first crush and my first breakup and my first, like they art sticks with you. And there's something, I think, since you can't control that, like I think society likes to kind of keep it down, because with sports at least, it's like, you can make a lot of money, you just go out and watch guys get, traumatic brain
yeah.
injuries, um, and beat the shit out of each other. So that kind of taps into that very like, you know, Coliseum, like bloodthirst, kind of thing that we have, I think. Um, and artistry is considered more sensitive, and but again, it's more, you're opening yourself up whenever you do anything, whether it's writing music or painting or sculpting, or even I grew up in Kentucky, and very, wood carving is a big thing down there at arts and crafts. But it's a certain type of arts and crafts. Like if you're if you're crafting like furniture and things out of wood, then that's great. But if you want to dance or act,
Mm,
so
yeah.
it's a strange cultural.
When you're creating, work now or in, in the last couple of years, uh, do you do you do that now envisioning, I don't know, let's say a $20 million budget and you want it to live with a studio, or do you have to be more, because I feel like years ago that was kind of the thing. That's majority of people were, were writing movies for to live at a studio and they wanted it to be this big picture. And obviously now things have expanded with all the streamers. There's so
Yeah.
many different places for content to live. Do you have to, I guess, create with that in mind that this could potentially end up living anywhere? Or do you have like specific projects? Okay, well, this is something I think could be, maybe a Netflix thing, or this is something I think that needs to be like a big blockbuster.
Yeah, I mean, most of my horror films aren't big, super big spectacle kind of things. Like I tend to write more character-based stuff. Um, but if I get permission, like the last script that I wrote, I was like, this is a story that I need to tell, and so I'm not going to worry about the budget. I'm just going to write it. And then everybody's like, oh, that's going to be like 15 million. You're never going to get that made. And I'm like, yes, I will. But no, I tend to write story first and not really think about. I can't say I don't think about it, because working at a studio, I'm sure it's like burrowed in my brain somewhere. But I don't. I haven't found a story that I can set in a house over one night. Like
Yes. Yeah.
that's just not my. I wrote a slasher film, which is great. But most of my stuff is kind of fantasy horror, so there's going to be elements that are going to make it a little pricey, but still not like $20 million pricey. Um, so I found if I try to limit myself too much, it can hurt myself. Like but sometimes I'll see movies like, because it's hard. Like, how many movies can we set in a cabin in the woods with something trying to kill the people in the cabin? Like, but then I'll see a movie that's like does a great job at it, and I'm like, holy shit, that this was a great movie. So I think if you're, it depends on what your goal is. I think if you're trying to get something made, which should always be our goal, especially if you're starting out, because again, you've got to learn. Like, the biggest mistake I see writers make is that, a first time writer will be like, this is the best script, in the world. And the few times where it's been a friend of mine where I've read it, and I'm like, it's not even they don't have the structure down. They don't, and they don't want to hear any complaints. And I think that you have to know, like, Meryl Streep said she still gets sick, before shooting a movie. Like, she gets
Mm.
physically ill. And that's because, like, if you ever lose that part of yourself, like, where I'm, this is a growing experience, and I'm, and you think that you're the best in the business, like, you're just, some people can get pushed through with bravado. Like, there are a few people that have done that, but the ones that kind of have longevity are the ones that kind of are always willing to grow. You treat people with respect, because, and you, just as a human being, you should treat everybody with respect. But, from a business perspective, you never know that assistant that were not, was nice to on the phone 15 years ago is now like an executive at a studio. And she's like, oh yeah, I remember Jeffrey. He was great. Like, he was so sweet. So yeah, I'm just like throwing out all kinds of random advice. So I just,
And that's what people love, though, because I think they want to hear I suppose, the real aspects of it, because we're fed so much, I suppose, for worse, probably, on social media. You see the fake side kind of everything. So it's very hard to, and then I think people get into it with the intention, best intentions, but they believe a certain thing that they've seen on social media or on YouTube or somewhere, well, that's how it is, and that's what I expect. And then when, like you said, you get a couple of years in, and you get that cold hard slap in the face of, like, oh, this isn't the way I thought it was going to be.
no. And the thing is, it never is, because, so many people I've noticed now are a lot of the younger generation. They want to be celebrities as opposed to like being artists, and that's fine. I'm not judging people for that, but um, the people that watch these kind of influencers, they don't realize, like, how, like, again, this isn't any fancy backdrop in my apartment, but if I turn the camera that way or this way, it's like a fucking mess,
Same.
but it's all about what's in the frame. And so you'll see these influencers who are like, you know, on a yacht and with all this stuff, and you're like, oh, their life is great. And then you hear their story, and it's like, oh, they just murdered their girlfriend, and you know, they lost everything in Bitcoin, and that they're being abused and exploited. Like, you don't. It's fake. It's so much. I mean, Hollywood is, it's all about what's in the frame, and it's the land of dreams, and dreams are obviously illusion until you make them a reality. So I think social media has been, and also just because it's shown that it's caused so much, like, depression, and especially young men, because because they see these unrealistic expectations out there, and women as well, where you see these people that are like, I'm living my best life, and it's like, that's just in the camera. Like, I could do that. I could start an OnlyFans, but I would just do writing. It would be very boring. Um, you know, but, like, I see so many people, like, that are just, they're younger, so they're just chasing the instant gratification and trying to get as much money as they can. And again, that's great, but that's different than being an artist.
Do you think, this just came into my mind as you were saying that? Do you think that deep down, like, a lot of us know that, but you kind of don't want to believe that? In a sense, you want to believe that, like, that I don't know, that thing you've built up in your head is actually how it is.
Yes. um, I mean, I still, I still want to, have that, problem where I have two houses. I never
Mm.
have. I don't want a big mansion. All I want is, like, enough room for a guest, and I want to have an in-house theater. Like that's all I want. Like so it's not like I want one of these like $20 million mansions, but yeah, I'd love to have like a couple of houses and just be able to do the projects I want to do. And once you get to a certain level, you can do that. But very few people are at that level now because of the way that the studio systems are. You've got Tom Cruise is there, but I can't envy him because he's worked so hard, and he started the Mission Impossible franchise. Like he produced that. And so, I mean, I don't want him to die. He needs to quit doing some of those crazy stunts.
Yeah.
But there's only a few people at his level that can just walk into a studio and get a movie greenlit. And that's changed a lot because, again, the model has changed. Like I will have a $5 million script and I will bring in an actor or an actress, and they're like, oh, they don't have the international value. I'm like, are you friggin' kidding me? This person's won an Oscar and has never done a horror film, and you're telling me they don't have international value now. So that kind of change in the business has been very frustrating to deal with.
So it's like the goalposts are kind of always being moved or changed all the time.
Yeah, they move the goalposts for us, but not for them. So, back in the good old days, like New Line would buy a script and they would go out and hire a director, hire the casting director, bring on the cast. Now we're expected, if we're going to a studio, we're expected to have like a director attached, a cast attached. It's crazy how much it's changed. Like where they put all the onus on us when it's like we don't like I can't afford to like hire Ethan Hawke to be in my movie. Like you guys are supposed to be paying Ethan Hawke to be in my movie. So a lot of that has changed, and that's why again I keep defaulting to there's so much technology now that you can make stuff on your own with a crew of people that you love and tell like stories that you want to tell, and they will find an audience. I do believe that. I do believe if you tell a story that you're passionate about and you do it, maybe the first one doesn't take off, but if you just keep at it, you will find an audience, because horror fans especially are very loyal, and they're also looking for new stuff. So like I'm always going through, literally, I'm like all the channels. I'm like, fuck, I've seen this movie. Is there anything I haven't seen? And I've literally, because I've been watching these horror movies since I was like 14. So it's like I've seen every. I'm sure there's something I haven't seen, but I can't find it on any of the streaming services.
Yeah,
So,
no, I definitely feel that.
So it's like, yes, if you do, please make some movies. I would, because I know there are a lot of horror fans like me that are out there just looking for something new to watch.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about the idea of, by the end of this year, you would like to have your own production company up and running. And like, obviously in recent years, you have produced, a lot of movies. For people who don't know, and maybe in layman's terms, if you can, what is the role of a producer? And when you say, I want to have my own production company, I want to help people produce their movies, I think people get misconstrued as to what that actually means.
Yeah, there's a couple of different definitions for a producer. Like the hardcore straight up answer is somebody who, like Craig Perry. I always use him because he's awesome. Like Craig Perry guides the project from the beginning, from the development of the idea through production. He's on set making sure everything's run, everything comes in on budget. He's kind of deflecting any fights between the studio and the director. He's trying to play Switzerland in there so that none of the drama spills over to the people on set. And he guides post-production and, making sure the film gets completed on time and on budget. So that's the like on the grounds hand-on producer. Some producers, will work on like getting cast attached and getting some financing involved, getting some financing. But that can fall into the executive producer thing. And there's a lot of people I know that will just slap their name on a movie as a producer that did nothing but put in some money. So, but the first definition is what a producer does. Like for a production company, a lot of times it's more of like, it's not a vanity title. You'll see a lot of actors and actresses with production companies.
Yeah.
but the thing is, you have to kind of build up a reputation where people will hopefully invest in movies that you want them to invest in. So, like I said, I got pretty, you know, that's what I am manifesting this year, because I've got just several projects that I have coming out, and so I do want to have a production company that hopefully we can do a couple of these projects under, and then once it's proven, then you can kind of set up maybe a deal with a studio, or studios will know that if you're bringing them a project, okay, we really should look at this one.
Is that the key, I guess, to that then, is having that um that proof of concept, that little bit of clout, for want of a better word, to be able to say, this is who I am, this is what I do, and that when my stamp is on it, like, this is the level of quality.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, one of the things that I've done is I've certainly, I love everything, even the people that have bought my scripts and made them for really cheap. Like, I learned to love something about everything. But, there was a point there where I was just, because I wanted to help people, where I was just putting my name on all my friends' stuff just to help them get financing or distribution. And it's like, all right, I got to quit doing that, because,
I was just going to ask that, not to cut you off, but is that because I would imagine, as somebody so kind-hearted and open, I'm assuming people just come from every angle with, like, hey, look, I've got this movie, I've got this thing, can you help, can you help, can you help? And how difficult that is then to be able to take a step back and go, "Whoo, guys, I need to take care of myself first, actually, because this is just like we're taking pieces from."
Yeah. I mean, I literally just started doing this like the end of last year. So, so it took me it took me like, yeah, I turned 55. So yeah, I waited a lot later in life than most people do to kind of do that, because I feel, then I always feel bad, like I feel bad if I say no to somebody, but it's like, it's kind of like the oxygen on a plane. It's like, if I'm not getting my career and my production, you know, the stuff that I'm producing, if I'm not getting that, focusing on making sure that I'm doing the best stuff possible, as opposed to like helping everybody I can right now and putting my name on everything, that's not going to help people in the long run, you know. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, because then it's like, oh, he's got a lot of produced credits. Some of them are good, some of them are meh, So I'm like, I got to focus on no more meh projects right now. Um,
What is it like? Because again, I think from an audience, from an outside point of view, a lot of people would be kind of maybe a little bit taken aback by some of the stuff you've said about, the difficulties on getting a project to completion and actually, seeing it come to life the way you envisioned it. Um, is there any, like, even now to this day, I would imagine, at least, there's still a huge amount of weight behind saying, I was a core aspect in creating one of the biggest and best horror franchises of all time.
yeah, no, I mean, that certainly helps. It's just, I don't want to be riding that to my grave. Um, that does help a lot, because the good thing is, a lot of people now that are decision makers kind of grew up on the franchise, so they love it. Um, so it helps, but it's not a knockout, Um, every it does help though. It does help, and um, but making movies is hard. Like, it 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 really takes a team to make a movie, and you can make something. One of my friends had a great thing that he told me. He's like, you can make a movie for any budget. Like, it doesn't matter what you've written, you can make it for a budget, any budget. It just depends on how the film's going to turn out. So, um that's the hard part, is like realizing, like, as a writer, this is one of the only businesses where you sell the copyright to your script to a studio. Like, artists will, like, license, they will own their art, but they can have people can print it off and sell it. But we sell the copyright to our material to the studio. So they can do whatever they want with it after we're involved. So, Um, if you want your true vision to come through, you not only need to direct your own work, but you also have the money to do it. So that can be hard. Like I love reading James Cameron scripts because when you read his scripts, like the movie that you see in your head from his writing is exactly what ends up on the screen.
Mm.
And that's because he's got the money to do that. Um, and it's hard to, it's hard to get in that scenario where you have the money to bring your vision to the screen like you see it. And sometimes a director will come on and have a completely different vision in his head than what you've written. And so I'm like, if it's better, that's great. But sometimes I don't know what you were thinking when you did it. So, I always have to stay in a place of gratitude because I realize like, you know, I have managed, there's only been one time in my career since I started at New Line where I had to take like a shitty job for like 6 months to pay the bills. And again, I live very meagerly. Like I'm either at Starbucks every day, so I'm very easy to stalk if you're in Los Angeles. I'm at Starbucks every day writing, and other than that, I'm watching movies, um, or I'm working on producing and getting stuff done. Um, but yeah, like it's a business where people assume that you have a shit ton of money. Like if you Google my net worth, it says it's like $5 million. I'm like, I've never had $1 million at one time in my life. I don't know where Google. I wish I could bank that Google that Google money, or that Google line to get a line of credit. But
Yeah, I've seen that multiple times. People have told me that, oh, my net worth says this and that, and they're like, it's not even like
it's
nowhere even close, like astronomical. You mentioned, I said about being a core aspect of creating one of the greatest horror franchises and things, but then I was also going to follow that up with something you kind of alluded to slightly. While you're super proud of that, and it's a big part of your career and your life, and it's something that I think you should be hugely proud of. I think it's part of your legacy, and it'll live on, I think, for a long time for a lot of people.
oh yeah.
But is there an aspect, I guess, of like, maybe a little bit of like not wanting to, I don't want to just be the Final Destination guy. I don't, because I can only imagine how many times a week you get asked questions about Final Destination. Final Destination comes up.
No, I mean honestly, and I've said this, and I'm genuine about this. Like as a horror fan, I always remember that kid from Kentucky. You know what I'm saying? So if you'd have told me, I mean, I was silly enough to believe it at the time, but if you really told me that I would kind of create something that would become part of the public zeitgeist, um, that would be enough for me. So I could die tomorrow and I'd still be happy. Like I genuinely mean that. Like, but I still have a lot of years left in me and I have a lot of stories I want to tell. So I just, I would like to be from the creator of Final Destination and,
Yes. Yeah.
and I love like I love all my films. Like again, I find something to love about all of them, but I do want, there's a couple of stories that I just had been dying to tell for so many years, for decades even, and they're either tied up at studios and turn around and too expensive to get back, or it's just so it's just frustrating knowing that there's other stories that, and I've written some shitty scripts too, so I don't want people thinking that I think all my stuff is good, but I've got like 4 or 5 scripts that I'm really proud of that are just, they've been tied up, at studios, and we can't get them out, and it's just frustrating.
In those situations like that, when you've written a script and it's been bought by a studio and it's tied up like that, is there any at any point, like, does the rights or the license revert back to you, or is it literally just a case of like it's stuck there until the right person comes along in the company and goes, hey, we should probably just like let this go, or like do a deal or do something?
They won't let it go. If they're an honorable company, they will just charge you whatever they spent, to write the movie. But a lot of times people just have this knee jerk reaction of like, oh my God, it's in turnaround. I don't want to deal with the legal paperwork and the hassle of getting it. For something like Final Destination, thanks to copyright laws and stuff like that, like, I'll be in my 60s when the rights revert, technically revert back to me. So, yeah, that'll be fun in my 60s. If something's bought by a studio, you have to like usually just pay them what they paid you to get it back.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've heard of that.
Costs too. They'll add on like strange costs, and it's like there's no way you spent all this extra money on this thing because I wrote it and then you put it on a shelf. So maybe you paid somebody to dust the shelf off a little bit, but
why do you think companies do that now? I've heard of this time and time again of and it's like you mentioned earlier about, people taking pitch meetings and that they have no intentions or even want to care about making a movie, but they're just kind of doing it because it's like the machine feeding itself. The idea of I hear so many people like get excited, their script gets picked up or it gets bought and they're like so excited to see it get made, and then nothing happens, and then next year nothing happens and nothing happens, and it's like then they talk to other creators and it's like, oh yeah, they bought my script as well around that time, and oh yeah, they bought his script that time as well, and it's like are they just buying the ideas up so nobody else can like?
I mean, I would hope that a lot of the studios do go in with the best intentions of making films, but what happens a lot of times is if there's a change of management or if a new VP or development person comes on, a lot of times they say, we want to start with a clean slate. So they will just put everything that was in development before they came on a shelf. And that just sucks. Like I've just seen it happen over and over again. And it's like, yeah, you should maybe pick out the good ones, and work on those. But they want to have ownership. So they want to start with a clean slate. So that happens a lot of times. I mean, I definitely have heard a few times where a studio's had something in development and a script will come in that's similar, so they'll buy that script so that but that's kind of the rarity. I do think because getting a studio to buy a script is hard. So once they do make that commitment to buy something, I do think they have the intention of trying to make it. But when I used to work at New Line, like we would have like scripts that were priority development, priority development, active development, then development, and then scripts that were bought. And that list was like pages. So, it's that's why I tell people that like the studio, like trying to go the studio route, especially nowadays where it's gotten more business focused and more risk averse. There's so many other options out there, like so many streaming options. It's still you don't want to spend a ton of money on festivals, but still doing a really good horror film that gets buzz at festivals, can help you out. You just got to look at all the options. And again, I always tell people to look in your, if you're in the US, look at your state film, programs. If you're in other countries, I know they have actual like subsidies for like films, and, they will help you out a lot, so just look at all the options to try to get your stuff made. And I think that starts with getting a good script and then maybe getting a good director. It doesn't have to be a famous director. It can be a good director. And just start making your own work, because that's going to keep your passion. That's going to keep your creative juices flowing. That's going to keep you excited about working. There's nothing worse than sitting around, when you've got something out there and it's like 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, and you're still waiting for the phone call. Do
you think then, in the current state of things, if we look at the last, say, 12 months in the industry, the success of The Substance, Longlegs made a shit ton of money and it seemed to be quite well received, Terrifier, all these kind of things. And then if we look at I suppose the flip side of that, a lot of these Disney like AAA IP TV shows that are coming out have kind of all seemingly been a flop. These huge $200 million movies that are coming out from some of these companies full of superheroes and all this different stuff. And I don't know, audiences just don't seem to care anymore. It's like, I don't really care about that. I'll go see another Longlegs. I'll go see a companion. I want to go see something like that. Do you think if things were to continue that way, that there might be, I'm not saying an even keel, but will it maybe start to shift it a bit, and maybe they'll be a bit more receptive to some original stuff and allowing people back in?
I think so. But the problem with a business person is, again, they're always just going to look at numbers. So it's like, another example I'll give is like, I'll see, like, I'll read a comedy script that's hysterical, but to cover their asses, a lot of the times executives will be like, well, let's hire the 5 best comedy writers in Hollywood to come in and do a pass on the script. So then you get 5 other voices coming in and changing stuff around, and then you end up with a muddled like mess of a movie. And that's coming from a place of like fear on the creative side, where it's like you're not trusting your gut that this is good. So it's like, well, let's bring on more people, so that way if it tanks, we can say, well, we had the best 5 comedy writers in town work on it. Well, we don't know what happened. So that kind of mentality kind of ties into the blockbuster IP remake kind of thing. Like, it's good for the companies that make those movies, because I think, like, Neon and A24, like, Blumhouse, they have success. There's a lot of the companies that have successes, and they will be more open to doing stuff. But, for the big studios, you almost have to go in with a package that they can't say no to. And that's, hard to do. That's hard to do. And again, it's not about, and this, I don't say that to discourage anybody, because the thing is, if you make a studio film, yes, it gets out in the theaters, which is great, but you're not going to see much money. You're much more likely to see money from an independent film that you do yourself, and find distribution for. Because according to the studios, like Final Destination, that franchise is like way in the hole still, as far as like profit participation goes. Because the studios have all the marketing costs and the distribution costs and the print. There's so many costs that go into releasing a movie in theaters. It's great to go see it in a theater, and ideally you want to, but seeing it in a theater at a great film festival with a great audience is just as satisfying as seeing it at AMC. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. It's almost as satisfying as seeing it at AMC.
So sometimes, and like I can say this from a place of just being so outside of that like industry, but I find like I go to film festivals and things, and I see some of these movies, and you feel like you're among your people, and the people who it was made for are the ones that are all sitting there. So it has this weird, unique atmosphere. It's not just like the couple who wandered in, or they're just looking for a date movie they don't really know what it's about. It's all those people who are kind of excited for it. You mentioned, sitting down to write and being at Starbucks and stuff. What does your your writing process look like on a daily basis? So obviously you said you like to go to Starbucks. Is that's like your thing that works for you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes because I have ADD, so I need the kind of background noise around me, and plus I don't want to. I'm kind of a social person, so I just need to be around people. So I don't like sitting at home, but my process is really all over the place. It depends on what I'm working on, to be honest. Like, I always tell people, like, this is advice that I don't take myself often, but the best thing to do is to outline your script. And once you've got that to a place where you feel like it's strong enough, just vomit out the first draft. Get that first draft out, because what most writers tend to do, myself included, is we'll start writing a script. We're like 5 pages in, we're rewriting the first 5 pages, then we write 5 more, and then we rewrite the 10 pages. So by the time you get pages into the script, you're like burned out. So if you just vomit that first draft out, and then once it's all on paper, then you can start going through the revisions and the tweaks, because you've got the whole movie laid out now, as opposed to like doing it as you're going along, because you will burn yourself out. Like, I know so many writers, it's like, well, I made it 30 pages into the script and I hate it already. It's like, yeah, because, and I've done that too. It's like, yeah, because I keep rewriting it, and then you start doubting yourself. And I think that's why it's easier to get that first draft out. kind of trust your gut on that first draft, and then do all the hard work of going back in and revising.
Are you somebody who sets yourself like I don't want to say a strict routine, but somewhat of a formatted routine, or do you like to, I don't know, do you like to write and work when, let's say later today you're sitting there and you hadn't intended on writing, and then you're like, you know what? Actually, I kind of feel something. Let me grab the laptop or the notebook and let me take a walk for a coffee and do something.
I do the latter, but I suggest the former because when I was my most productive when I worked at New Line, because I would come in an hour early and write, and I would stay like an hour or two after hours and write. And every writer that I've talked to, every book that I've read, they always say you should set aside a certain time to write. And it doesn't have to be like a certain number of pages. But the thing is, if you set the same time, like every day I'm going to sit down and write for this hour, what happens is your brain starts processing and getting into writing mode before you sit down. And I saw that happen at New Line, because I would, by the time I got to there an hour early, I was ready to go. And then once the clock ended and I got to my script, I was just ready to go. And that's when I was most productive, because I had a schedule. Right now, because I'm trying to do so many things at the same time, it's like I don't have the luxury of necessarily having a schedule. It's more like, when is my deadline?
Yeah.
But I would highly advise writers to set aside a specific time, and don't kill yourself. Don't start off like 2 hours or whatever. Start off small and let it bigger. But it does psychologically, you're like, it's just been like proven, like your brain will start getting into writing mode long before you, like if you set it at 3 o'clock, your brain's already getting into writing mode. So it's not like you sit down at a computer like at some random time and you're looking at a blank page going, oh, what the fuck am I going to do? What am I, so I definitely recommend, setting aside a certain amount of time to work.
Do you deal with struggles with trying to turn off the creative brain? So for example, I don't know if you're trying to just sit down and just watch a movie, or go to the theater and just watch a movie, or go out with friends for food or something like that. Sometimes do you find that you struggle with like maybe the projects swirling around your head and you're like, oh shit, I need to like do that thing?
No, it's like a fucking hamster wheel up here. Like I have trouble shutting off my brain at night, but it's mostly because I worry about my friends, I worry about the world, I worry about all this other, I tend to worry a little bit, maybe a lot, about things that I don't have any control over. So that's really the only time I have trouble shutting my brain off, is like if something's going on with a friend or family, or if something horrible is happening in the world, like I tend to take that on. So that's really the part of my brain I have trouble shutting down.
You mentioned being a warrior. Is there ever, obviously to do what you've done and get where you've gotten, you have to have kind of a little bit of everything. I think people think to be a successful writer, you just have to be good at writing. And then it's like, well, no, actually, you have to be good at pitching. You have to be good at networking. You have to be good at, the business side of it. You have to be good at this and that. And there's a lot of other stuff that's involved. While that's still at the core of, I guess, your passion and your love, is there ever a worry, I guess, business wise and financially? Like I find, I don't know, from the more people I talk to in the arts and in a creative endeavor, I even get like this secondhand anxiety about like, God, I feel like if, because it's not guaranteed, it's not you don't just sign with one company and get told, okay, well, this is your paycheck every year. It's guaranteed no matter what happens. It's all good. It's that anxiety of like, I have to have something. I have 5 plates spinning at once.
Yeah.
One of these needs to go soon. Something needs to happen.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you need to live. You need to exist still as well.
Yeah. No, that happens like literally all the time. Yeah, that is but I've turned that worry into like being proactive now, because there's a lot of things that you can do. Like, I tell filmmakers, like, if you've made a film, or if you're, research companies that put out the kind of films that you've made. Like, you've got to do a lot of homework, because there's so many companies out there, and there's, a lot of them are won't take, unsolicited material, but some of them will. You can still send them a query letter, but look for companies that make the kind of films that you want to make. And, even if they're low, there's a lot of local production companies, in different states. Like, I've had some companies that just did commercials that were like, well, we kind of want to get into film, and so, bring us an indie script, and, and we'll make it. Like, so, look for those kind of opportunities too. Like, you've really got to do your research on the business side of it, which sucks, because it used to be you just had to worry about writing a good script, but it is show business, which, it's been an old saying, like, before I was born, but it's gotten more business, especially when you're in, like, a hub like LA or something like that. So, but again, I think you just have to do your research, and I do tell people, if they're, especially if you're horror writers, like, find your subgenre that you love writing. Like, if somebody said, hey, you can only write one kind of movie for 10 years, like, what kind of movie would that be? Because if you go out with a slasher film that people love, they're going to ask for your next slasher film. And you can say, I've got this great thriller, and they're like, slasher, we need your next slasher. It's just, they can't get their brain around the fact that you wrote something other than the last thing they liked. So I'm not saying tell the same story, but I'm just saying find the genre that you're most like. Some people like writing horror comedies, and some people like writing dark thrillers, and some people like writing ghost stories. Like, find the genre that you would be comfortable with, just from a business practical point of view. Because the first thing that gets somebody excited about your writing, they're going to want to see. They're not going to want to see an exact copy of that, but they're going to want it to be in the same ballpark. Like, so if you're a comedy writer, they're going to want to see your next comedy. They're not going to want to read a drama that you wrote, which I know is counterintuitive to artists, because a lot of times we love to show that we can do everything. But practically, you want to find your niche, so that Jeffrey does horror, and yes, I can do other things, and I've done other things, but it's good because there's so many people out there. Again, it's rising through the clutter. It's like, you want people to, when they think of your name, it's like, okay, they can put a film to that and put a genre to that.
It's just funny. Just listening to you say that, I can see exactly what you mean about, like, that kind of having to, wanting to do other things, but then also having to kind of have your style, or like your thing. Had you ever been approached after Final Destination, or since then, at any point, about other franchises, or potentially bringing other, I don't know, other IPs, other names?
Yeah, I mean, I pitched on a lot of stuff, and I've gotten, close on some things. But yeah, well, I did write the Day of the Dead remake. We might as well bring that up. If they didn't call it Day of the Dead, it's a really fun movie. Like, it's a really fun movie. But how that came about is the production company had already hired Steve Miner to direct the movie, and they were going to make it, like, one way or the other. And so I'm like, well, let me, I love Steve Miner. Let me go in and pitch. And I pitched a very faithful, kind of updated version, but very faithful. Like, took place mostly in a bunker, had a lot of the same. It wasn't even though I loved Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead remake, I love it. It wasn't like that close of a remake, but it was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot closer to Day of the Dead than what ended up getting made, because that process was one of the hardest ones I've ever been through, because they hired me based off my pitch. And then as I was writing the script, they kept making me change stuff and take stuff out and move stuff around. And I was like, guys, we're going to get massacred for doing this movie anyway. So why are you fucking with it so much that we're just going to get more massacred? And so, yeah, that was, again, I enjoy the movie now. I just wish it was called something else.
And that's definitely happened, I think, several times to people, where You know, they've gotten involved in something like that, and I'm like, you know what? If this had have just came out and it didn't have that title attached to it, nobody probably would have said half of the things that they said.
Yeah.
I think it's that, like, I don't know if it's gatekeeping or something like that, where people feel this need to be like,
I understand. I understand it as a fan. Like, you know, like that's why I love Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead remake. I thought it kept the spirit of the movie, kept a lot of the set pieces, but I just thought he did a great. Like, I loved the movie. I have nothing against remakes, if they're done well, because it's just part of the business. And you know, you can hate them all you want, but in my opinion, like a lot of times remakes will reintroduce a new audience to like the original film. So I think that there's, you know, and plus, if somebody remakes like A Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean, Wes Craven isn't with us anymore, unfortunately. But you know, if people remake A Nightmare on Elm Street, people are going to go back and watch the earlier ones, and that's going to help. That's going to help financially help Wes out. You know what I'm saying? So it's, I get it from a creative point of view. We don't want to have remakes, but again, that's what the studios are putting out, and um, you know, we can complain about it, you know, as fans, but they're going to keep making them. You know, that's, even if they don't make a ton of money, there's younger audiences that haven't seen the original that will go see the remake. So they're, you know, your only hope is that you can do a really good one. Which I will, if I have to do another one, I will make sure that I have a lot more control. But again, at the end of the day, I still really enjoy the movie. I just wish they would have called it like Zombie Attack, you know.
I'm gonna go out on one here, and people can say what they like after the fact, but I always personally enjoyed that, and I purposely didn't mention it because I know how some of the audience kind of perceive that, and it's that thing of, I feel it's really weird about, I don't know how I feel about the whole gatekeeping thing, because I've seen it happen multiple times with things. And maybe when I was younger, I used to be a little bit more, I would kind of jump on the bandwagon and be like, yeah, the original, you can't do anything and whatever. And then I thought about it, and someone once said to me, you know, every story's already been told, but just
Every,
not by you yet.
yeah, and that is true. There, every story has been told before, in some form or another. And yeah, you don't, you know, if it feels like a cheap cash grab, then it's insulting. But nothing's replacing the original film. Like, I still watch the original Nightmare. I've watched that movie. God, I can't even, so many fucking times. So many, way more than I've seen Final Destination. But I started off younger. But I will watch that original all the time, and it's like the remake doesn't take that original movie away from me. And like I said, if anything, it introduces an audience to the original. And yeah, audiences, they may be like, oh, Freddy's arms look cheesy, or you know, big hair. Everybody had big hair, but fuck them, they're watching it.
Yeah. No, you're right. I have one or two more quick questions before I let you go today. With Final Destinations, you know, since those the core movies like 1 and 2, how involved had you been since then, right up until now? Obviously, I know, you know, we've a new movie coming out this year. It's the 25th anniversary of the original. You know, there's a lot of big things for the franchise, but how involved are you actually, you know, with it? Do you get contacted? Do they bring you in? Do they ask your opinions? Like, how does that work?
You know what? You know, I was involved, very involved in the second movie. After that, I haven't been like technically involved, but I'm really tight with, you know, I've gotten, you know, I've been really good friends with like the people that have been involved in the sequels, like David Ellis. You know, I'm friends with Tony Todd. You know, I've gotten to know the whole team behind the new film. They've been amazing. And you know, I'm friends with Craig Perry. So you know, he lets me know kind of what's going on. Sometimes he'll bounce ideas off of me. Um, you know, like the whole ending of part 5. I'm not going to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but that was going to be the ending of part 4, and they pushed it, and I'm so glad they did. So like you know, I love that the franchise has been in really good hands. And has brought a lot of people. Like, I was a big fan of AJ Cook before she played Kimberly. Like, I'd seen her in some indie films. I'm like, this girl's going to be a star. And when we got her for like Final Destination 2, and now I'm like watching Criminal Minds all the time, because she, like, I love that so many of the people that have been in those films have gone on to do bigger things. And the directors have gone on to do bigger things. I mean, James Wong Morgan, after Final Destination, they went off and directed features. They hadn't directed features before. So, and David Ellis was a stunt guy, but he kicked ass with Final Destination 2. And Eric Bress, who him and J. Mackie Gruber wrote the script and co-wrote the story for the second one along with me. They're great guys, and they're like, it's just so I just love it. Like, I feel with Craig, it's in wonderful hands, and it's a franchise that, like I said, I'm really proud of. I'm kind of a big, like, I felt like I got to do everything I wanted to in part 2. I got to expand, the mythology. I introduced a bunch of kids that you thought were going to be the leads, and then I murdered them all except for AJ Cook. Originally, I had Alex and Kimberly coming back, or Alex and Claire both coming back, and they couldn't make it work out with Devin. But it's not canon since we didn't see him die, in my brain. And also, we didn't see AJ Cook and Michael Landis. We didn't see their characters die after part 2. So, I've just been pushing Craig to, like, let's stop killing people at all the ends of the movies, because that really isn't canon. Because the whole idea with Final Destination was, when I wrote it was, when I wrote, the original draft that I wrote was that you can't cheat death, but you can live a better, longer life. Like, it wasn't like, so, and I don't think it was till part 3 that they started, well, in part 5, well, I don't want to spoil shit, but that's the thing is I would love, because I think I love the Rube Goldberg stuff. James Wong and Glenn Morgan came up with that, and I think, like I said, it was brilliant. But I would like to explore more, like, the mythology of the branches of how it spreads out. And there's some Bloodlines is going to be fucking great. Like, I can tell you that. So everybody.
Yeah, I was just going to ask really quickly, like, how much do you know about that? Do you get to go and see early, test footage? Like, how does that work?
I know all about it, but I haven't gone to. I didn't want to see it. I don't want to see it until, because they're still working on the sound mix. So I didn't want to go to any of the test screenings, because I want to see it when it's, like, done.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I've seen enough. I've seen enough and read enough to know that it's going to be great. And the directors are amazing. The writers are, we have the screenwriters, the screenwriters, John Watts, who did the Spider-Man movies, came up with the story, and then Adam Stein and Zach, oh God, I'm going to say his name wrong, Lepowski, they did Freaks. They are such big fans of the franchise. Like, that's what I love about the people that have come on board the films is none of them have been hired guns. Like, they're all, like, fans of huge fans of the franchise. So, the goal is to not just make a shitty Final Destination movie. And if there's ever been an issue with the film, it's like, obviously for one of them, like, they had to write the script in like 3 weeks because the writer's strike was happening. So, if there's ever been an issue with one of the films not maybe having as much depth as the rest of them, it's because, like, the writers didn't have time to, spend the time that they would have normally spent on the script. But I think even the films that, I don't think there's been I'm biased, but I don't think there's been a bad entry in the franchise. Like,
I was literally going to say that a lot of people talk about, Scream being one of the only horror franchise that hasn't really had a bad sequel or hasn't had an overly bad movie in the franchise. And I'm always like, did you forget about Final Destination? And I think some of that comes from a really good place, which is probably even better, is not saying people don't consider Final Destination horror, but a lot of people I know who don't like horror movies love Final Destination.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's again, that's why I'm really touched, by how it has impacted people. And again, I think the Rube Goldberg thing was so crucial. And also it was fun because I came up with that log truck scene driving home to Kentucky, because we had this general story figured out, and the producers, like, it was going to be a hotel fire. But they used that for a comic book, actually, one of the Final Destination comic books. And Craig's like, yeah, we just need a better opening. Like, we need something big. And I was driving home to Kentucky behind a log truck, and I pulled into the next lane, and then I pulled off the highway, and I called him, and he's like, that's the fucking opening. And so it's so cool. I mean, people are like, you must get sick of seeing these. I probably get a log truck video or meme every day.
Like, but that must be crazy, right? To be, now maybe after a while it wears off, but like
It doesn't.
every time I see that, I'm looking at it from the point of view of going, I can't imagine how I would feel if I had created something that people make memes of, and some of them have no idea of, like, all the people behind it, and the person who came up with the concept and all that. And I'm like, that's when you really know that, like, you've crossed over into the zeitgeist. It's not just a movie anymore. It's become like a part of, to me at least anyway, from the outside looking in, it has become a part of culture. Like I said, the amount of people that I know who always refer to me as, like, the movie guy, the horror guy, the whatever, that don't like those kind of movies but love Final Destination, and not because they say, oh, that's not horror. It's like, oh no, they're just so fun to go and watch. I get so caught up in the story. I'm so entertained for 90 minutes or 2 hours. And I'm like, yeah, and you're forgetting the fact that you're going to a horror franchise.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, it actually doesn't get old, because like you said, horror is always kind of the I hate to say redheaded stepchild, because some of the hottest guys I know are redheads. But it is just this industry, they're happy to make money off of it, but they don't want to acknowledge the artistry behind it. And I think hopefully that will change, with Substance. I don't know if it will. Like, I thought Hereditary would have done that. But yeah, like, it, just knowing that, that it's part of the zeitgeist and getting those little reminders, it always just makes me smile. Like, it doesn't get old. It just makes me smile. And I just tell people, don't send me anything where somebody gets killed. Like, I don't want to, if it's a video, an accident where somebody dies, like, I don't want to see that. But you can send me anything behind a log truck or a, Christmas trees. I know Devin put out a funny meme a couple years ago with, like, a truck with Christmas trees on it. And,
yeah, I see that.
That is, like, or any object on a truck is funny.
Speaking of that, I would consider Final Destination, and probably all of them, I would say, but definitely those first, like, 2 or 3 movies, comfort movies for me, like movies that I revisit time and time again. And sometimes I've had filmmakers take that as a little bit of an insult, and maybe it was the way I came across it. And I was like, no, I mean, as in, like, I think I would nearly rather be a comfort movie than be a really popular movie for 2 weeks, and then everybody just forgets about me and nobody ever knows. You say, oh yeah, I made that movie. And they're like, oh, what? I don't know what that is.
I mean, yeah, I can't speak for other filmmakers. I mean, my attitude is, if you have a successful career, and it doesn't have to be, again, you don't have to be like, The Conjuring, James Wan, who's different than James Wong. You don't have to be that level of successful, but if, this was a dream of yours, and if you've been fortunate enough to have a movie or several movies made, just fucking be grateful. Like, I don't understand people, like, no, Nightmare on Elm Street's my comfort movie. I mean, I love that movie and adore it. So there's no insult in having, your comfort things. Like, that's things that bring you joy when you're stressed out. You want to and enjoy something. So
that's exactly. And it kind of, I don't know, it teleports me to a place, and it teleports me back to, like, the early 2000s. And, like, I start to feel all those feelings I felt when I first watched it, But do you have, other than Nightmare on Elm Street, do you have any comfort movies that you find yourself maybe revisiting more than others?
Yeah, I mean, I love Suspiria. I love Candyman. Um, I love Psycho. Um, I will randomly pop on a Friday the 13th every once in a
Mhm.
while. Halloween, you know. Sometimes I'll watch a Tom Savini Night of the Living Dead movie. That's like
Yeah,
one
yeah.
I'll pop on too. Um, but it just depends. Like I have so many DVDs, like it's crazy. But now that everything's digital, I've been dumb and bought them all. Like I have bought the digital copies too. So yeah, sometimes I'll just scroll through. I'm like, oh, I want to watch, Alien. That's a horror movie. Or I want to watch Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Original and the remake. Yeah, like the classics are my comfort movies, but I'll also have these days where I'm just scrolling through and I'm like, oh, I want to watch this one today. You know?
Yeah, yeah, I get that totally. For everybody listening, then, where's the best place that they can support you, or I guess, keep up to date with what you're doing? I feel like a lot of times, I know we probably can't talk about specific projects or anything like that. But I always like to try and connect the audience, I guess, with the creator in the aspect of, being able to keep an eye. So when you do have something that you can announce, that people can help share it and spread the word and kind of
Oh yeah.
support.
Yeah, no, and I'm very mindful of what I can't share, but I will share stuff that I can share. And I also love to support like my friends who are horror filmmakers, and so I'm always like sharing their stuff too. So probably the best way is Twitter, and
Yeah.
Instagram. It's my handle is my name, Jeffrey A. Reddick. So I think it's best to follow me on those two. I mean, I'm also on Threads and Blue Sky, but I can't keep up with all these things. So
There's a lot.
it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. And so I Twitter, I'd like to get off of it, but that's where I have the most, followers, and so I can kind of share messages about
Mhm.
films and my stuff there. But yeah, I'm on Instagram as well. So
For everybody listening, whether it's audio or video, if you go into the description, the links will be down below anyway, so you can support Jeffrey's stuff there. So, final question then today before I let you go is, why horror? What keeps you coming back to it, and what does it mean to you?
for me, horror was a very good way to process a lot of the shit I went through growing up. Being a person of color and being gay in Eastern Kentucky back in the 80s, 70s and 80s was
Mm.
not, or anywhere actually. I'm sorry. I was born in Florida, but I claimed Kentucky because that's where I started grade school through, college. So that's where my formative years are. But I mean, shit was like I was born in '69, so the civil rights movement had just happened. So it was not, people were still very backwards when I was growing up. So there was a lot of shit that I went through, and horror really helped me kind of, I think process a lot of that fear and anger. I shouldn't, like I could just watch these movies and just have fun with them. Um, that's why I get really annoyed when people try to blame horror movies for like real life violence. Because
Yeah, yeah.
every horror filmmaker that I know is like the nicest person. Some of us are a little quirky, but none of the people that I know are violent or fight. They grew up on, like growing up watching these movies, like you're already a nerd, but you're not an angry nerd that wants to go in and like, kill people. Um, so I think that part of it always was what kind of started me with it. But what I love about it now is you can tell so many different types of stories in the genre. Um, and I still have fun because I just want to come up with new ways to kill people on screen. Like that's for me is what the fun part is. Like, all right, what can I do that I haven't seen, or how can I spin this in a way that is gonna like really freak people out. So I'm still trying to just outdo myself in my writing with like new ways to like scare people or get under their skin. So that's it's fun for me, like I'm the most non-violent person in real life. I mean, I can fight. Like if somebody attacks me, I will fight them, or attacks my cats and I will fight them. But but just as far as, like violence, like, I'm just not a violent person, and none of the horror filmmakers that I know are violent either. I think it's a romantic comedy, right? That's a joke, but I was like, you should probably watch out for those romantic comedy writers, because they're the ones that have been burned a lot and they're probably angry.
It is funny the amount of people who said to me, "Oh, a lot of those people you speak to are obviously probably a bit crazy or a bit aggressive," and I'm like, it's actually the opposite of like the perception you might have. Anybody I've met, look, I've had a few weird interactions and stuff like that, but for the most part, it's been like 95% like the most kind, genuine, positive people that you could ever meet.
I know, and they'll meet you and they're like, "What?" I'm surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised you're like, where do you come up with this crazy? Your mind must be. I'm like, no, it's just for me. It's cathartic and it's entertaining. Like I want to entertain people. I try not to be mean spirited in my horror scripts. The last two that I've written have come from like a place of like where I have tapped into some of the stuff that I haven't tapped into in my other work, because I wanted all my other stuff to be fun and entertaining. So I've tapped into some stuff that I've, have been holding in for a long time. But the scripts aren't mean spirited, but they are dark.
Yeah.
They're much darker than my other stuff. So, yeah, I'm excited for that to get out into the world.
Yeah, well, like I was just going to say, this has been a pleasure and something I've wanted to do for a long time, and didn't disappoint. And I think everybody else will probably agree with me. I think everyone's going to have a good time with this conversation here and what you had to say. I'm super excited to see what you have next. I can't wait to find out, and I would love to keep in touch and maybe do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
It would be
And then
fantastic.
next time I figure out where to look at the camera, because I
Oh,
feel like I'm looking off to the side the whole time.
People always give me shit for that. They always tell me that it looks like I have googly eyes, and I'm like,
well, thank you so much for having me, and we will absolutely stay in touch. And it was a pleasure. And again, I loved Ireland, so hopefully I will get over there again.
yeah, get you back out here again.
Yeah, so when I do, I'll hit you up. Okay.
100%. Thanks,
All
Jeff.
right. Have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.